Let's see. Jane back on is trying to figure out who's on here. All right.
I'm continuing to have some internet, so I might have my camera off for part of the time.
Okay. Just speak up if you, like I said, I can't always see everyone. If you have a question, just speak up. Okay, we're back live. Excuse me. And we're going to continue. There was some questions yesterday about bicyclists, and we certainly want to help them on the incentive program. But some of the questions I raise and others is, what are we doing about safety on bikes, and what do they have to follow? Because there's a mixed reaction out there from the public. Some are driving their bikes in the main traffic, others are on the side of the road, and we want to make sure that if we do give incentives, that everything is safe for bicyclists. So, not knowing the complete story, we thought you folks had offered to come in and give us a little update. So I don't know if I worded that correctly. Any other member of the committee have any questions to add before we get started? If not, who would like to take the lead? John or Karen?
Give me an idea of what you would like to hear about, because John and I can probably speak to the same things. But...
Well, one of the things that we were questioning yesterday was what do bicyclists do when they get a bicycle? Do they have any safety course they have to take? Because I noticed, I just brought up one example. I was down by the mall in Williston the other day, and the bicycle's going right down through the middle, right in a traffic lane. And are they entitled to do that? Or are they have to stay to the right-hand side of the highway? Is there any, when you buy a bike, and if we give incentives to buy bikes, is there any course or something they have to take for knowing the rules of the road? Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know. I know you don't have to take a course to pass something, but I didn't know what, if you just sell someone a bicycle, or some dealer sells someone a bicycle, are they given it without knowing exactly where they are entitled to drive? Because some go right in traffic, some don't. I followed one down the other day down in the bay here, and they were right in front of me. And they were, but do they have to have safety equipment? Do they have to have lights, or do they have to have, what is the policy? And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
And are they mandated to use the bike path if there's one available versus in traffic?
Yeah.
So I can speak to a little of that. I think John can put a finer point on anything I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things to think about here, because we sort of live this all the time. And yes, you're right. There are some people that their behavior may seem incorrect for the road. Sometimes that's because they don't know. Very often it's because the driver doesn't know that what they're doing is okay. And also there's just unintentional mistakes, which happens with people who drive and people who bike all the time. And by the way, those errors are equal between drivers and bikers. It's just that it's easier for people in cars to see when people in bikes are doing something that they don't understand or they think is wrong. Just to speak to what you learn when you buy a bike, not a whole lot, but we have and can continue to provide sort of cue cards, if you will, that so here are the rules of the road. It's the same thing that we use in the schools. We teach young kids how to bike early. We teach college kids how to bike. We teach new bikers how to bike all the time. We do a lot of workshops. In those workshops, we do that training, but we also have some cards that can explain some of that. It's potentially we could do more of that. We've kind of focused mostly on Chittenden County. So that's something I just made a note to think about if there's potential for getting those in more people's hands. So Ski Rack would hand those out, for instance, to people when they bought bikes in years past. One thing to keep in mind, though, that the people you're seeing on the roads, especially well, we just talked about Canada, anywhere against the Canadian border when there's visitors here, anywhere really, they aren't always people that are from here. They can be from somewhere else. They brought their bike with them. So it's really hard to reach everybody with the rules of the road. And as I said, people are sometimes can make mistakes. So I think one of the things that we often think about, and since this is a transportation committee, it seems like the right place to pick it up, is the best thing that we can do as a state to keep everybody safe is to make sure the infrastructure is safe and it's clear to both the people who bike and the people who drive. There are times like someone, you mentioned where are they supposed to be on the road? Well, a biker has the right to be on the road. Our transportation system is not just for people in cars, it's for people in bikes. Sometimes there's a place for them to be, sometimes there's a protected lane for them to be, and they will be in that. Sometimes there's just some markings, and to their best ability, they'll be in that. They also have the right to be in the lane when they think it's going to keep them safe. And so where I live out in Waterbury, there are places where the road has not much of a shoulder, and you might be on a blind curve. And I've definitely seen people, try to be in the lane a little bit more, which I'll do because I want people to know that I'm there because I really don't want to die. So those are just sort of a preface to how you might want to think about this, and that those errors, like I said, are happening all the time with people in cars. They happen with people in bikes. They might just make a wrong choice.
Let me stop you right there. When you say with people in cars, error, but people in cars have to have mandatory insurance.
Mhm.
They have to register their car. They have to, like I said, insure the car. They have to pass an inspection, and they have to take a driver safety course before
Sure.
they get an automobile.
Yeah.
If I'm saying this correctly from you, you can go to Walmart, grab a bike off a rack, and go home and get on a highway, and you have no obligations whatsoever. An officer can't stop you for anything because we have no guidelines for bicyclists. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think they do. I know that officers will sometimes try to correct people, like if they're going through a stoplight or a.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, on the roads. Yeah, I don't know that they do a lot of that, but again, most bikers have a sense of what they're supposed to do. We do our best to educate them as much as possible. I was just on a call with the Vermont Highway Safety Alliance. John was there too. That's an organization that, is behind things like Click It or Ticket, some of those big campaigns. We're talking to them about doing some bigger PSA campaigns that reach driver's ed and schools, reach the general public. I think that people aren't trying to make the wrong choices. They just sometimes might do things that aren't particularly safe. There's also a lot of new infrastructure that V-Trans is putting out there now where both people on bikes and people on cars aren't necessarily sure what to do with it. Some of the green paint things that you see around. And I've been talking to John and others about how the state and us as well can do more education on that. So now driver's ed training they have components there on what new infrastructure looks like in the same way they would around new highway design.
Is there a bicycle safety course like that people could take?
We do them, yeah.
So with voluntary or something, you have to, because like I said, there's a hunter safety course, and I just wonder, is there a course that is given for bicyclists free and they just pass or don't pass, or how does that work?
I don't know of anything like that, John. I don't think that's something I've never seen that actually, but we do a lot of training where we think we can get to people the most. One thing you guys might be interested in, because I think at some point there's going to be a bill around this from someone in a different committee, is thinking about driver's ed training, because that's a time when you get an awful lot of people that might be making bad choices on the road, either on bikes or on cars or whatever. Putting driver's ed more in the category of transportation education, so that in that training, right now we do training through them on like how a driver should think about what they do when they come across a biker on the road or someone standing in a right of way to cross the road, something like that. That's a place where we could also do some training about how do you bike? You don't always have to drive, right? So it's driver's ed, but there are a lot of people that would like it to be transportation ed. How do you get on a bus carefully? How do you deal with crossing the road? Those sorts of things are, I think, I have two daughters who are now in their 20s, but when they were in high school, they weren't thinking about a lot of that stuff. And in Mount Mansfield, where they went to school, the driver's ed teacher was pretty good, and he really drove through wrong term, but he really made them understand the safety situation on the road for all users. And I think that sort of model could be one place where the state could do more at the point where you can reach people the most. And sometimes that happens with new Americans too, that they have to go through driver's ed sorts of training.
But now-
Universities do training.
But now we're going to incentivize bikes, a couple $100. So we play an important role if we're going to incentivize them, which is good. On the other hand, we're incentivizing something that they have no knowledge of. I mean, I don't know how we're going to do that and protect ourselves also, because if we're giving them the right to drive or ride their bikes on the highway, do they know the rules? Do they know where they should ride and not ride? And it is so confusing out there. I think we all run across bikes that don't follow the rules. And I know you say automobiles too also, but the consequences of automobile is, they do have insurance and they do have other things they have to pass, where bicyclists, you buy a bike and you go out and ride it. That's it. I mean, nobody tells you.
Well, and I mean, this is probably obvious to everybody, but a 1-ton vehicle, the amount of damage that they can do if they break the rules is a lot more dangerous than a bike. And a bike, very often, it's the biker that's going to take the fall. So what we think about is, how can we get those cyclists to be as safe as possible? And so you brought a good point up there. What if we do have these documents. I think there's probably things that the state can get too, that are like the rules of the road kind of in an infographic. Like I said, we used to have bike shops hand them out. What if that's part of the package that you get? Is when you're in, if you're buying a bike in Vermont, and I don't know if we can do this, but I'm assuming we could, the state could do this, that when you buy that bike with that incentive, or not, just any bike maybe, you get the card, you get the thing that's pretty quick. I mean, I think most people want to do the right thing. And so explaining how to be on the road, how to deal with an intersection, how to deal with cars that are near you, in the same way that we hopefully do that with people who are driving. That might be a low-hanging fruit, not that expensive way to reach people. You're only reaching people in that case that buy a bike.
How old do you have to be when you get a bicycle to get on the highway? What's the age?
John?
If I buy a bicycle today, how old do I have to be to take that bicycle and go from here to Burlington and drive in traffic and everything? What's the age limit?
The state has anything on that? John, do you know?
Yeah. Would you like me to answer?
Yeah, please. Just curious.
Okay. Good morning. So just for the record, John Kaplan with VTrans. I oversee the bike and pedestrian program.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe there is anything in statute that has any age limitation on how old you have to be to ride a bike on the road.
We could take a 7 or 8 year old and turn that youngster out into the highway, a major highway today with all the traffic, and let him go.
I mean, I guess in theory, the answer to that is yes.
Wow. Wow.
But I think,
That's shocking.
well, I think Karen brought up a lot of good points. I think we are doing a lot in the area of education. There is a curriculum. There's a bike safe curriculum that the agency developed when we had the Safe Routes to School program, which was back around like 2005 to 2010 roughly. And I know that Local Motion, I believe, still uses that curriculum when they go out to schools and various places and do bike education. So, I think there is some personal responsibility there. As a parent, I wouldn't send my 7-year-old out onto a busy highway, but if they wanted to ride from our house to the school, and we live down in the village, and it's fairly, the roads are relatively safe, there's a way for them to get there, then that could be okay. And of course, some of that is kind of parental responsibility of teaching your kids how to ride well. I wanted to answer just a couple of questions that I forget which of the senators brought it up, but just some specific questions. So there are equipment requirements for bikes. For example, bikes are required to use lights when and there's some hours defined in statute when lights are required. And there are, in general, there's state law that says that bikes are subject to the same rights and responsibilities as vehicles. So that's where you get into things like stopping for stop signs and those types of things. So that is defined. So they do have responsibilities that are outlined. And, you know, as far as, I think someone asked about like riding in the lane. So state law says that a bicyclist has to ride as far to the right as is safe, and then it gives some exceptions. For example, if there's, you know, sometimes there might be like glass or some other debris on the side of the road, or some other reason why a bicyclist would need to come out into the lane. But generally the law says you ride as far to the right as is safe. And let's see, what I just jotted down a couple other things. You know, there is no, you know, I think Karen already mentioned this, there is no required course to ride a bike, nothing in statute. I like the idea of, you know, sort of getting information to people when they are purchasing a bike. In fact, just before COVID, we were working with Locomotion to put together a package of information to get out to all the bike shops in the state. And that all kind of got sidelined, unfortunately, but certainly hasn't been forgotten. Because we have some printed materials around bike safety. We've worked collaboratively with Locomotion on putting some of those together and getting them into the hands of bike shops and others. And let's see, I mean, I think one of the big things that VTrans has been working on is a lot of this does have to do with the infrastructure. So places around the country and around the world that have good safety records regarding bicyclists are ones that have invested and have very complete infrastructure for bike riding. So
we have done that here in Vermont. We have, every time we pave a road, we make sure there's a lane available. So we've met our
Right.
challenge there.
Exactly.
Would you favor registering bikes?
Are you asking me personally? I mean, I
No,
think
I'm trying to find the safety part of this bike,
yeah,
because I don't see it. I'm amazed that you can get a bicycle, a 10-year-old can get a bike and go right down the middle of traffic in Church Street, or not Church Street, wherever, a main road right in the middle, and where our cars are, with no training or no course to pass, and I'm just amazed with no insurance. I mean, boy, that's a lot of burden on someone.
yeah. I mean, I like the idea of some kind of more regular incorporation of education,
Right.
however that gets done, if it's part of school curriculum or
aware, but yeah.
or tied into materials that you are provided when you buy a bike, something like that. I think there's some, you know, you were talking at the very beginning about kind of tourism and whatnot. I think bike registration would be kind of problematic in terms of people visiting the state. Right. Yep. If they're coming here from a state that doesn't have that. So I think there's some complexities to that. And I think it could discourage people from riding in a time where, you know, for various reasons, I think, you know, we have agency policy, I know, about encouraging people to ride bikes. So I think registration could work counter to that.
I think I've asked enough questions. Let's open up the committee. Go right ahead, Senator Ingalls.
You're muted, Senator Ingalls.
You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you. And as you said, Senator Mazza, there's not a project that we don't include a bike path in that I've seen that bikes would normally travel. And if we're not going to have them use the bike pass, and maybe we ought to rethink our positions about putting bike pass in. I mean, we're putting bike pass in to safely make people aware that bikes are there and give them a safe patches. It's just like putting in a different lane for an automobile, that you would do the same thing. So I don't know that it's mandated that they do that or not, but I would think that they should be.
Senator Chittenden?
Yeah, so I would frame this conversation as regulating the safe use of our main traffic way or the main roadway. If people want to bike on sidewalks, recreation paths, 7, 8-year-olds, I think that's something separate. But when you want to get out in the middle of the roadway, I'm curious to know how much as we see more bikes, how much have we adopted some of the things they have over in Europe in the highly dense areas where they make it clear that if you're going to use the public roadway, that you can't do more than 2 side by side, that you can't do that if you're hindering traffic, that you have when you can turn right. I'm looking at a couple of different pages. I would love to know if we can issue tickets, if law enforcement can issue tickets if people are inappropriately biking in the main thoroughfare, hindering and frustrating traffic and causing a safety concern. And I'm also interested to know if other states have adopted that as well. So I echo Senator Mazza's concern about, as we're encouraging and seeing more e-bikes and more bicycles, I think we need to think about ways to regulate the safe use of them on our main thoroughfares and roadways as they interoperate with vehicles.
Okay, question? Jane, anybody? Senator Birchler?
No.
Well, it ties into education. An earlier comment that we had, and that is if we're providing incentives, which are going to design to increase the number of cyclists on our roads, how to tie together, making sure, and you talked about the cards given out at the time of purchase, and how, so we're trying to think of ways that that if we're, as part of this, how we get the education out and the requirements out to promote the safety aspect, as well as just the replacement for vehicles. So that was part of our earlier discussion, and I think it raises a whole lot of questions, as you've just heard, as the number of cyclists on the roads are competing for space, and how to make sure that we are addressing safety as well as carbon emissions.
May I make a
Yes,
quick?
go right ahead. Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So one interesting fact when you look at data from countries that have high levels of biking, as the number of bicyclists increase, the safety increases also. So there's sort of like safety in numbers is kind of the concept. And some of that comes from, some of it is the infrastructure that's provided, but some of it is that as you get more bicyclists and everyone gets more used to them being on the road, the interactions actually get safer and people get more used to how do you interact with them. And I'd be happy to follow up. I think I have a kind of a graphic that I got from one article that shows that. You know, countries that have high levels of bicyclists have the best safety records. It's not tied to things like helmet use, which is where it's come up in the past, I know. So helmet use does not equal safety. Safety is much more tied to good infrastructure and sort of high levels of bicycling, which is a little bit counterintuitive.
But the fact still remains, bicyclists are now in with traffic and they're not on the side of the road. And that creates, I think, a different situation because we want to make sure they're safe. But on the other hand, boy, when I hear stories of they have no safety obligation or no test to take, and they can be 10 years old, it just scares me. I just can't believe that we're allowing this to happen in today's times, because like I said, we have a driver training. You're 16 years old. You have to go through a driver's training to get your license for an automobile. So we're putting a lot of burden on automobiles, but I don't know about the safety of, can an officer stop someone for DUI on a bicycle? Is that possible? Or is that even there? I don't know.
I would think if they're weaving down the road, they could.
I just, these are some of the things that,
I thought somebody had said that they're required to follow the same rules of the road as
but how do they know the
someone
rules?
behind the vehicle.
How do they know the rules of the road if they don't have any tested any?
No, my point is, if somebody was doing that, then I believe law enforcement right now has authority to
yeah, no, I think
arrest them.
they could give them a ticket or whatever. But when I hear that someone can go out to University Mall and rent a bicycle, electric bike, and never been on a bike before, and rent that bike and go anywhere they want to go on it in traffic. That worries me. Maybe it's not a problem. I just,
Well, I think that, you know, someone brought up Europe. You can go to Montreal and see the same thing. You go to Washington, D.C., you can go to any number of states in this country and see this, that it really makes a difference that if you want people to bike, and people want to bike here. The younger generation doesn't necessarily want to own a car. E-bikes are sort of changing the calculus a little bit about what it means to be able to get around, and get to work and do your daily, you know, your daily rides and all that kind of thing. If you want that here, you don't want to exclude it from Vermont. And I would urge us to embrace it, because it's a big deal in terms of economic development and just quality of life and attracting people to a state, which obviously we need to do.
we want to make sure it's safe. That's,
Yeah,
that's,
so then
and I think we're missing that. We want to make sure that people are riding bikes, but if we're going to incentivize bikes, we have an obligation to make sure that it's done in a safe way. And I'm missing something here, but I don't see
Here's
what.
some thoughts that,
Yeah.
so, you know, so I know that John has been working really hard this past year on a plan document for biking and walking in the state that has metrics in it that are going to help guide VTrans to make sure that we have that infrastructure that you see in places where you feel like cars and bikes are both using the road well. The more of that, there's nothing better to do as a state than to make sure that we have that safe infrastructure on the road for people walking, people biking, people in cars. I think you probably all have seen, and this is about walking, but you've probably all seen places where some family is pushing their baby carriage down that little few inches on the side of the road, to try to go to grandma's house or whatever. It is just the reality of a rural place. But the state's doing a really good job right now. And John's mentioned some of these that there are places where it's much, much safer to do that. And they've got a map that is going to be looking at the places that should get that sort of treatment next. That'll make a big difference in terms of how people in cars feel and how bikes feel. I think in terms of training people, getting it into schools, you know, when you purchase a bike, you get the card. PSA is the kind of thing that Vermont Highway Safety Administration does all the time for people driving intoxicated or people, you know, under the influence or crossing train tracks incorrectly and all those sorts of things. If we could start to do more of that for riders, for cyclists, I think that those people will respond. I think you see some things. Yes, there are outliers where people do stupid stuff. That's going to happen in any vehicle, but the roads are for everyone. And people in cars do it, people in bikes do it. But the people in bikes, I think by and large, just like drivers, don't want to do the wrong thing. So if we could focus on better infrastructure, which I think we're getting there. And
No, we're getting there. We're doing a good job on that
yeah, I think we're doing a good job.
Yes, we're doing a good job.
Yeah, so that'll help a lot, and you'll start to see with every new project that VTrans does that things will get better. If you couple that with, you know, let's pick up this Safe Routes to Schools effort and get these pieces of information out to the cycle shops, out to the schools. We already get them. We work in all 14 counties with our school programming, so kids are going through curriculum in most of our schools to learn how to cycle very safely. And so those kids are going to be the next generation. But we can
every school offers safety for bicycles?
Not everyone, but we are in all 14 states. And for instance, Rutland now wants to do it in most of their schools. So eventually we want to embed it in the schools. If that happens, all these little kids that are getting bikes for Christmas, I don't want to be the one that finds out that I can't go biking with my kids. So they are learning how to do that safely, and they're doing it with their peers and they're doing it with their parents in some cases. So there are opportunities to get the information out. I think we need like a multi-pronged approach. I actually really like the what Click It or Ticket did for wearing a seatbelt in the state. It was a simple slogan. They peppered that all over the place for years. I'm not suggesting we do that with biking, but you can see how people sort of learn to think that way. There were PSAs everywhere. I remember when I first got here, people didn't wear seatbelts, and now they do. So if we can do that sort of thing for people biking and walking, I mean, biking and driving around each other on the roads, people want to do the right thing. I really believe that.
There's a cost factor, and I'm just saying, motorists pay that for that service, and bicyclists do not pay for that service. And there's a difference here about how we fund these safety programs. And
Well, I think I bike and I own a car, so I think that by and large, except for people that maybe don't own a car and don't pay taxes at all on anything, there's money in the system that all of us that are biking and walking and driving and taking trains and transit, we're all in it together. So I think that the money can be used to get the word out. It doesn't have to be the big thing that they did with Ticket or Click It, but I was pointing out because it was a simple thing, a simple slogan that really stuck and changed people's behavior. So we can do that with other things. That would be great.
hey, and it's I think we're going to drop this morning. We got to move on. We'll get back to this. We still got some more questions. So before we continue with the bikes, we'll have at this point, we thank you for coming, but we've got to move on to our next topic, and then we'll get back to this at another time. Thank you very much.
Get in touch if you need something.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thanks.
we have work zones, I believe. Is that correct? Amy Gamlin, and who we got? Tony, and we got a group of folks who would like to lead off on the next subject this morning.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
My name is Ann. I'm Ann Gamble.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So you're going to talk to us about safety, work zone.
Yes.
With
I will lead off.
Okay.
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 All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Just for the record, my name is Ann Gamble. I am the Chief Engineer of the Agency of Transportations and the Director of the Highway Division. With me this morning are Lieutenant Tara Thomas, Special Operations Executive Director of the Vermont State Police, Josh Schultz, Operations and Safety Bureau Director for the agency, and Costa Pappas, our agency's Policy and Planning Manager.
Boy, all the important people here today. Wow.
We are here today to provide you with information regarding automated traffic law enforcement study and its report proposed by the agency, the Department of Public Service, and the Associated General Contractors of Vermont. This report is to help improve work zone safety for both workers and travelers. The study and subsequent report will aid us in our decision whether to entertain a pilot work zone automated traffic law enforcement project in subsequent years by researching the cost of such a system, the collection of data, defining system components, and what and how the data can be used to aid law enforcement and the agency in establishing safer work zones. And with your permission, Chair, I'd like to turn the floor over to Josh Schultz, who will provide the details of the proposal. Lieutenant Thomas and I are here to help answer any questions that the committee may have. If there's any other questions we can't answer at this time, we're happy to research them and get back to you.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, Josh.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Again, Josh Schultz here. I oversee the Operations and Safety Bureau under Ann Gamble in the Highway Division at VTrans. And I'm going to give you guys the punchline first. I mean, basically, we are here to testify, and we're in support of the language that's currently in the transportation bill that would authorize the agency to undergo some research about automated speed enforcement in work zones. And before I get into exactly what that language would enable us to do, I just wanted to explain a little bit about why we were interested in doing this. And really what we're really trying to do is improve safety. So safety is the big motivating factor in all of this. We're looking to research the notion of being able to employ a pilot on if in the future, if authorized by the legislature and in future legislative language, to be able to employ automated speed enforcement only in work zones, probably 1 to 3 work zones for one season. And the reason that we're really looking to do this is because there are staffing limitations with law enforcement. There's also practical restrictions in work zones at times where we just simply, you can't safely pull drivers over. And this would give us the ability to not to issue tickets or fines or even warnings. Really, what we would want to do ultimately is simply be able to send people letters informing them that they were exceeding the speed limit of over 10 miles an hour over the speed limit in a work zone. Now, I just want to reinforce the fact that this language right now does not authorize us to do any of that. It just authorizes us to just simply go and do some research to see if this is something that Vermont should do. And the idea is that we would come back and testify before you folks next year and let you know what we find. The research portion, so this is what the language would enable us to do, is to figure out how much this would cost. So because we're not going to be looking to issue any fines for this, the cost would be totally 100% borne out by the state of Vermont. So we would like to look into the cost. We'd like to research, are there any federal funds that would be available if we were to proceed? We also want to research how images are collected and also be able to make recommendations about that. So how they're collected, how they're stored, how they're accessed, used, disposed of, the timing of all of that, and of course, and follow up with recommendations as well based on our findings. We also want to define exactly what are the components that would be needed in a system like this. There's lots of different types of technology out there that probably cover the whole gamut of automated speed enforcement. What would we need here in Vermont if we're doing this just in work zones at 1, 2, or 3 sites? Do we need a quote unquote Cadillac version, or is a simple Chevy going to work? Metaphorically speaking. So we'd like to look into all of that and then report out to you all before or by. I think the language says January 15th, 2022. And again, ultimately, the ultimate goal is if we did come back and further language authorize this, it would be simply to just send out letters to folks, not looking to send tickets to anybody or warnings. We're just trying to improve safety, raise awareness for drivers. If they sped through a work zone 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, they'd get a letter in the mail. But again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I kind of thought it might be prudent to let you all know sort of the motivating factor behind this research that we're looking to be authorized to proceed with. I kind of rushed through that a little bit, but I think I covered the high points because I know you all are running a little bit behind schedule. So does anybody have any questions, or would you like me to expound on anything?
Any questions from the committee? Just jump right in because I can't see.
I have one question.
Go right ahead, Senator Burchett.
Can you confirm, is that when like the sheriff or any law enforcement is at a work zone site, that that they have to be there? Is that's a requirement on certain roads that you have law enforcement present, and that they're prohibited from like pulling over a speeder? If they're there as a work zone law enforcement vehicle, they can't also do speed enforcement. So even if they're there with their lights going and somebody zooms by speeding, they're not allowed to go chase them and give them a ticket. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's accurate. How except for one part, to my knowledge, and I'll if Lieutenant Thomas or Director Gamble find that I'm inaccurate with what I'm about to say, please chime in. But I don't believe it's a requirement that we have a sheriff at work zones, but we do that, especially on work zones on the interstate, all the time, because that blue light going, people see it, and hopefully their behavior changes and they slow down. But the part that is accurate is that those sheriffs that they are there at the entry point of our work zones, they can't leave there and pull over vehicles that are speeding through there. The reason is that we are there to slow people down, raise awareness. Hey, there's something here that you need to slow down for drivers. They're messaging the public that. So if they leave to go chase down speeders, then they're no longer at that post. One thing I just, and this kind of brought up another thought, Senator, that may be good for you all to hear, is that with ASE or automated speed enforcement, we're certainly not looking to stop enforcement in a work zone. So even if we have ASE set up in a work zone, that doesn't prohibit us from having the Vermont State Police or local enforcement or even the sheriff's, different sheriff vehicles and the ones with the blue lights, being able to do speed enforcement there. So I just wanted to kind of drive that point. We're not looking to replace law enforcement in any way with this initiative.
Okay. Any questions?
Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Chittenden.
More a statement. I fully support this, and I think this is the right approach to ease into this. There are a lot of privacy concerns, and I think this is best addressed in the approach you're taking so that we can work through those privacy concerns and we can get more comfortable with it, with the focus on safety, the safety of the work zone. So I'm excited about this project. If you wanted to go even further and initiate the pilot, that would have my full support. I don't know how to make that happen, but I just know that this is where it is well worth our attention, and I'm really interested to see what you come up with, because other states are doing this, the technology is available, and I think it opens up a lot of conversations, useful conversations about making our roadways more intelligent to keep up with the increasingly smart cars that are driving on top of them. So great work. I'm looking forward to what you come up with.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Okay. Okay. Tony's in the room. I think he's just entered. Or the state police is here. Who would like to comment? Do I hear any volunteers?
No volunteers.
I can go. First
Oh,
of all,
yeah. Good morning.
good morning, sir. Tony Fakis, Director of Enforcement and Safety, Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, and my apologies for being late to this.
No, you weren't late. No, we're just early.
No, I get it. I think this is just a really important step towards improving safety, given the current constraints that law enforcement has in terms of personnel and staffing. I think it's a step forward to keeping by having that step of motorists being notified that they were in violation using this technology. Because we can't just have a trooper, unfortunately, as much as we love to, or law enforcement at every one of, or even our folks at every one of these work zones to do full-on enforcement. So with that, I think anything that we do to add down the road, I had a meeting with the secretary this morning and the commissioner, just looking at we had looked at a crash map of all of our commercial vehicle crashes in the last 5 years. And one of the things I was looking at, with that, how do we better protect commercial trucking routes, for example? And we certainly know that primarily the tough area, the worst areas are 89 in the Chittenden County to Franklin County stretch to 80 to 91 the southern part. And one of the things that I had was actually a video from a retired law enforcement officer that I worked with for many years, who's now a truck driver, who was involved in a crash in a work zone. And we have it on video, and I was sharing that with the secretary this morning, where it happened on 91, where a vehicle, aggressive driving, speeding, trying to overtake the tractor trailer unit in a work zone where it necked down to the one lane. And basically the car drove into the left corner of the truck, and almost, fortunately, the speeds were, the truck was going at the appropriate speed. It was able to stop, and it didn't flip the vehicle, but it put the vehicle into the guardrail. I mean, this stuff is happening. I look at, these crashes, that are happening even with commercial vehicles, but we're just struggling to, to make sure that we do everything we can to change driver behavior, the distracted driving, the aggressive driving, and the speeding. It is, and of course the impaired driving is something that we're, it's just quite frankly, anecdotally, but we're seeing through crash data, things are getting worse in too many areas. So any step that we can take, utilizing technology, and this, I think it's a well thought out plan. It's going to have limited efficacy long term. Usually, right now with just a warning process, but down the road, it all translates into what we can do in terms of law enforcement with directly supporting safety in our work zones.
Seems to me that people are driving faster than ever. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but boy, the speed limit doesn't bother anybody. They're just going like crazy. The interstate is, yeah, it's amazing. Any questions for Tony this morning? We have, okay, thank you very much, Tony. Lieutenant Thomas, anything you'd like to add at this time?
Thank you, Senator. The state police, we fully support this. Having been at crashes and work zones, we see how vulnerable our workers are, and anything that we can do to implement technology for their safety, we certainly support. And just to kind of speak a little bit of the contracts, just to kind of clarify any of that information, there's almost kind of like two different contracts, and sometimes a sheriff is put in place, like Josh mentioned, like they're just to have a presence. But whenever you see a state trooper or other municipalities working in work zones, we are actually active enforcement. So when we do see a speeder coming, we can leave our post and address that motor vehicle violation.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. Any questions for the lieutenant this morning? Thank you for your input. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, any other comments this morning from the committee? We'll revisit the issue, but this is very helpful to have some input from people that are on the scene.
Yeah, well, the committee, we heard such passionate testimony from families who had relatives that were killed in work zones. And it just makes you feel very compelled to do whatever we can to protect them, because they're so vulnerable as they're standing out there. So I want to just say for new members, that testimony was really very compelling that we had.
Yeah, very good. Okay, nothing else in the committee? All right, at this point, I think we're all set for this morning, and I thank everybody